want to riff about some of the areas of persona, culture, environment, and mostly system theory, the phenomena of looking through the lens of a system rather than the lens of a particle or an individual. So in this drawing, the most important shape is the sphere, portrayed here as a circle, but really a sphere. And the sphere is divided by the quality of consciousness, which results in the number of distinctions. If you have a very simple level of consciousness with color, for example, you might develop, break down 7 colors, or in a more crude sense, 3 or 4 colors, the colors out of which a TV or LCD screen is created, or creates all the 256 million colors that a computer might calculate. So we're looking at the simplicity or the complexity of distinction, which correlates to the quality and level of consciousness. And the level of complexity, the amount of distinction, results in the lines that are refracted out of the sphere, the lines that are refracted out of the circle. So, for example, if we're just capable of grasping 7 distinct concepts, 7 distinct energies, 7 distinct numbers, then we divide the circle by 7. If we're capable of holding 24 distinctions, 48, 1,000, 500,000, 6 billion, 298 trillion, whatever the capacity with which we can relate consciously, determines, for practical purposes, the distinctions that we use, particularly when we're engaging through the human interface. We might be able to conceptualize 256 million colors, and on the basis of that conceptualization, program a computer to generate 256 million colors. But if we can't keep track on a personal level, if we create more than 100 colors and after about 10 colors we can't name the others, we can't say, oh, that's cream ivory and that's ivory cream, and that's ivory cream plus 1. We can't grasp that. Then we reduce the complexity down. Now, the sphere is an infinite number of lines. The circle is an infinite number of lines. And so the sphere is infinity squared. The line intersection with the sphere is defined by this aspect of complexity, which is defined or created out of the quality of consciousness. If you think of the quality of a screen, you think of the number of pixels per square inch. If you think of the quality of consciousness, you think of the number of conscious integrated refraction points per moment. If you can take a second in time, it's an eternity when you're looking through the right lens. If you take a second in time and refract it, is it a billion refractions, 1,000,000 refractions, 100,000 refractions, or 1 refraction? When you ask another human being, how are you feeling right now? How many different ways can that be refracted? What are you thinking right now? What could you be thinking? What are you seeing? What could you be seeing in this 1 second? 1,000,000,000 refractions, 1,000,000 refractions, 1,000 refractions, 100 refractions, 10 refractions, 1 refraction, or no refraction. It's an unconscious moment. I don't see anything. And I don't see that I don't see anything. And so I don't see anything about that. It's just a void of consciousness. Now, what's interesting about refractions is that they determine how much waste is generated. Now, the waste is an illusion. For example, if we take the circle and we divide it by 3. If we divide a circle by 3, we generate about 50% waste. The area outside of the triangle is about the same size as the area inside the triangle. If you take all this bit of area and flip it into the triangle, when you take a circle and divide it by 3, you generate 50% waste. Now, wasted what? And you start to see the illusion of waste, because waste doesn't exist except in the simple mind. The simple mind that can only focus on 3 things has an enormous amount of waste. Now, we actually generate an enormous amount of waste in the relationship between consciousness and data absorption. Our senses pick up 100% more data than the data that our mind notices. So in other words, if we were to take the orifices of the ears, the mouth, the smells, etc., the touch, etc., and we were to have a computer process and notice every single thing within our field of vision, within our sound range, within the temperature range, within the movement range, within the touch range, within the sensation range, what we would find is that, and we would just mount parallel cameras and ears and stuff, and then we would ask the computer what was seen in that moment. Or we might ask 10 different individuals or 100 different individuals what was seen, felt, heard, what they learned, what came out of that data for them. And we would see that what we get out of a minute of data can be expanded at least 500 times if we have an observant computer. One person sees this, one person sees this, and they're going to see through the lens of their distinctions. If you're trained in accents, you're going to see things that you won't see if you're not trained in accents. If you're more visual, you're going to see things you won't notice if you're blind. If you're blind, you're going to see things through the ears and through the sensations at a heightened rate. If you've got a thing about white people, you're going to see things differently than if race is not on your radar. You're going to see things in your mind differently around all that data. So when we look at a bit of data, when we look at a video like this, maybe 80% of what's there is not seen. Maybe 90%, maybe 95% of what's there to see is not seen. The universe is holographic, is fractal, which means that it is literally possible for someone to create a probability field around the entire existence of the universe based on what's happening in this video. For example, gravity might be deduced by the fact that I put the chalk down and let it go. The fact that my arms aren't floating up might also imply gravity. The muscle and sag points on skin. And if gravity is inferred, what else can be told about gravity? How much can you learn about electricity from the fact that electrical apparatus are present? And what about style? And what can you learn about culture? And what can you learn about the kinds of culture that care about style? And what can you learn about the fact that I'm talking to a camera instead of a circle of human beings? Volumes and volumes can be written based on 5 minutes of what's going on here. The universe is fractal, is holographic. We create the illusion of waste when we overlay a simple refraction pattern, a simple distinction pattern, on an infinite set of data. Within a cult or a culture, we set up a refraction pattern that is the system of that culture. And one of the things that we can see is roles. We have a role for this, and 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 a role for this. And these roles vary based on the zoom-in point of the lens. We have simple distinctions such as work and everything outside of work. Work being a big distinction point in a culture which consumes most of people's time learning in order to prepare for work, working, upgrading work, driving to work. So you can say there's work and then there's everything else. And then within work, you can look at all the different jobs. And within any culture, you create a series of roles. And that role leads to your script. You have a role and then you have a script. And the script and the role combine to create a play, a system. And then the question is, how does that system fit together? And one of the things I'm interested in this dynamic of both waste and roles and scripts and distinctions is, how do you create a container, a role and a script? How do you generate value from invisible potential. How do you reclaim some of the waste that is symptomatic of the level of consciousness more than it is symptomatic about waste itself? Meaning nature doesn't create waste. If you look at the basic life systems, a banana tree creates bananas, which, if they fall to the ground, fertilize the ground or produce new banana trees. But let's say a human intervenes, eats the banana, shits the banana, and fertilizes the banana tree. There's no waste. There's no waste if the product falls. There's no waste if there's a new banana tree. There's no waste if the animal or human that eats the banana fertilizes the banana tree. There's no waste in that design. A human being comes along and creates a plastic box in order to package something, in order to sell it, and does so in a context in which the culture, first of all, associates care with the amount of unnecessary waste. So, for example, if you have a very fancy, elaborate, high use of natural resources box, so the box has been carved and pressed and textured and painted and glossed and glossy font and done like this, and all of this is to open the box. And you say that it has a nice feel to it. It has a quality feel. You feel like you're getting something that's valuable. And so the use of that whole package is to provide that 5 to 10 seconds of feeling. But as soon as you've opened it and taken out the phone or the laptop, now the use of that package is over. And so now it is waste. Meaning, unlike nature, we don't know what to do with the thing that we created. So what we did in our culture is, first of all, we said that caring is a good thing. And we said that hard work is a good thing. And so if someone cares to make something difficult, then that's a good thing. And then we say that people who have good things are more important than people who have bad things. It's a thing value hierarchy. And then we say that I want to be one of the good people. And now the only way that you can be one of the good people is to buy things packaged in nice, labor-intensive, energy-intensive ways. Well, I want to be one of the good people. So now the manufacturer has to spend, 5% of the whole cost of the project making these elaborate packages so that you can tell yourself you're one of the good people who's valuable. And you're very upset if they don't do that. I paid $1,000 for this laptop. They just put it in a cardboard box. No. Oh, this is a nice feeling. I like this feeling. Okay, I'm done with that feeling now. I throw it away. But where does that go? Well, there's no plan. It's not like that fertilizes a banana tree. It's not like it fertilizes the next laptop. It's not like it sends money back to the computer manufacturer, because we don't know how to design as well as nature does. And so we invent this package called garbage or waste to hold space for our lack of creativity, our lack of imagination, our lack of sustainability. And then we pretend that waste exists. Of course there's waste, but only because we're inventing stuff that we don't know what to do with. If we invented stuff that we knew what to do with, there would be no waste. But that's not what we're doing. And it's, of course, valuable to understand the material aspects of these things because they ripple out emotionally and mentally as well. We have an affair that generates the feeling of guilt, which generates the feeling of anger, which we don't know what to do with. And so we put it aside. We dissociate from that feeling. Now that feeling becomes waste. I don't want to think about that feeling. I don't want to talk about that feeling. I don't know what to do with that feeling. It's just there. I wish it would go away like the things I throw out in the garbage can. But it doesn't. Any more than the things that we throw out in the garbage can. They don't just go away. A big truck gets them, hauls them off, often hundreds of miles, digs a big hole in the ground. Well, they don't go away from there either. Or an incinerator burns it all up into the atmosphere, and then everyone breathes that smoke and doesn't go away from that, on that basis either. So then the question is it more useful as hot air? Is it more useful as stuff in a hole in the ground? Is it more useful poisoning groundwater? Is it more useful making Chinese and Indian children sick, picking out the waste? What's useful? And we don't have an answer because we have a low quality of consciousness. Garbage is a very, very simple way of looking at this. Now, within every cult, there is a container that holds some degree of the energy patterns that are part of the probability field of the human psyche, that hold some of the energy that is archetypal. We have 12 zodiacal signs. We have 12 core archetypes. We have things like the tarot deck, as key aspects. We have these archetypal energies. And depending on how and why, etc., they're refracted, they can connect in a variety of ways. You can look at Enneagram or personality types. You can look at things like the lover and the warrior as archetypes. You can look at archetypal ages, the innocent one, the crone, the fullness of the woman. What we're looking at we're looking at pieces of reality through different lens settings. And it's very much like you take a crystal ball and then you cut it into facets. Now, if you cut the crystal ball in half and look through that, you see reality looking a certain way. If you cut it into thirds and look from the point side at reality, you see different colors, different data set. If you look from the flat side, looking through to the point, reality looks different. And of course, the lens that's useful is the lens that reveals a representation of reality, a map of reality that allows you to navigate. You know, what's useful in terms of a map in a vehicle is a map that tells you where to get to the place that you want to go. The map of reality that is representational, meaning we don't see reality. We see a representation of reality through the algorithm of our brain observing the data set of our five senses, with supplemental data created by imagination, by body memory, by past memory, by future projections. And we're able to create and say, based on what I know of this bit of reality, if I go and punch this person in the face right now, there's who knows what happens. But the odds are that my safety will go down. That's pretty safe to say on a statistical level. If you punch 100 people in the face and they're bigger than you, and some of them have guns, the odds are that you're going to get severely hurt or killed in one of those 100 punches. The odds are that that's not going to happen if you don't do that. So that's a useful statistical bit of reality. Now, you're not seeing reality. You don't know that particular person. You have a probability field. And a probability field that's useful is a probability field that's right more of the time than it's not right. That's a useful probability. If you can go to a gambling casino and place equal bets using an algorithm that is right 60% of the time, if you place 100 bets at a time, you will have a 99.9% chance of coming out ahead. You can come up with an algorithm that's right 75% of the time, where if you're right, you win $5, and if you lose $5. I mean, you are so statistically ahead of the game. And so that's all you're looking for with a map of reality. You're looking for an algorithm that is right a majority of the time. That's a good map of reality. It's not reality, it's a good map of reality. Now, what I'm interested in is the way that the psyche refracts into this vast probability field. And how these polar energies, you have something like the lover and the warrior. They tend to be on opposite sides of the spectrum. Or the one who's practical and the one who's esoteric, or the one who's masculine and the one who's feminine. There's all these different ways to slice the pie. And one of the important ways that we slice a pie in our culture is the polarity of what's focused on and exonerated and celebrated, and the polarity of what I would call the shadow, the bit that is demonized, vilified, and in consequence is suppressed. We don't focus on it. We don't like to look at that part in ourselves. We don't like to look at that part within our group and within our culture. We don't like to look at that in our world. And so we don't. We deny it. we suppress it, we transfer it. We try and put that part out of mind. So we have this distinction of that which is blessed within the cult, which is ascending, and that which is descending and cursed within the cult. The cult cursing things by dissociating and withdrawing support from the individuals who bring that face of the psyche into the circle. I'm going to pause now, this being the ending of part 1, and we'll continue riffing at a later time. So there's one piece that I want to capture before letting this go for now. And it's captured in this wheel of personas. And so, as the environment changes with time, the personas that come to the forefront in the psyche also change. As the environmental wheel turns, the dominant persona wheel turns with it. So you can kind of imagine that with this turning and this wheel turning in the opposite direction to accommodate the environmental changes. Now, as that occurs, what's interesting is that the persona that's right in front activates the persona that's right behind it, preparing the ground and feeding and fertilizing the persona that's coming. The persona behind poisons and kills the dominant persona. So here's kind of an example. I had a house manager who it was a young African-American artist, and he enjoyed his music, he enjoyed going for walks, we would have philosophical conversations, and he ran my house for me. And then he became a nurse at Kaiser, a local hospital. And all of the doctors that he hung out with were very emotionally reserved, were very high on the sociopathic continuum, which is a natural response to protecting one's emotions from being overwhelmed. And so, in a hospital environment, constant grief, desperation, uncertainty, and anxiety, feeling that if one makes the slightest mistake, someone may die, and all the various emotions associated with that can create overwhelming anxiety, overwhelming grief and exhaustion. It's one of the reasons that so many doctors get addicted to painkillers and amphetamines, through various hospital meds. I forget the exact statistic, but there's a high percentage of doctors that become addicted because certain drugs dissociate those emotions while simultaneously giving energy and concentrated focus, which might be good for a surgeon. And so in that environment, all the femininity in my young employee evaporated over a matter of about 30 to 90 days. And he wasn't as comfortable sharing feelings. He put up more and more barriers that mimicked the predominant environment. So, when it's a part-time job, just a couple hours a day. And so when his environmental context was music and art and walks and personal time and me, that environment led to, a high feminine awareness, emotional, tender, artistic, creative, relaxed. And so those personas predominated. Now, as soon as he went to work at the hospital, now his predominant environment in an 8-hour shift is the hospital. And so all of those qualities, all of those personas disappeared. They were not mirrored, valued, or encouraged in the hospital environment. And they were also simultaneously derided and discouraged. For example, doctors need to make somewhat insensitive jokes to diffuse the tension. Humor diffuses tension. And so a dark humor is developed amongst emergency care, people in war have to develop a dark humor. People in hospitals develop a dark humor, meaning there is a funny side to, someone coming in with a leg half hanging on if you're dissociated from the pain. And so there's, so the type of humor is high on the sociopathic continuum. And in order to feel like you belong and fit in, and I talked to him about this dynamic, and because he wasn't any fun to be around anymore. And I said, look, I can't talk to you. You don't share emotions. You're miserable. You don't want to talk about that. It's, if that environment, for whatever reason, and I think it's partly a status symbol, art, going for walks, being a part-time home manager in our culture is not a high status symbol. Working part-time as a higher paid, or working full-time as a higher paid nurse and a hospital, etc., is higher status, both in money and in importance. And then within that environment, the more sociopathic element. And then he was also trying to date one of the other nurses in a culture where what was cool and dateable was, being on the ball, being analytical, not being too emotional, being relaxed, no big deal. And he was actually stressing a lot about, not wanting to appear to be too interested, because if he appeared too interested, that would be uncool. And so, anything passionate was, low ranking in that environment. So in that sense, within 90 days, he's a different human being in his predominant personas. And within this color wheel, there's one persona that devastates and collapses any other persona. And there's one persona that enables and allows any one persona to blossom. So within this color wheel of personas, there's one, so whichever persona you pick, there is a persona on this mix that if that persona engages with it, it opens up. And there's a persona where if that persona engages with it, it dies. And you can think of this in terms of, for example, joy and the violator. So the joyful innocent persona, and we have very little vocabulary for the full spectrum and nuance of all these personas, and so there isn't really even a common language, but I'm sure you get the general feel of the joyful innocent persona. The joyful innocent persona is collapsed by willful cruelty. Now, cynicism is not collapsed by willful cruelty. Cynicism is built, meaning if this is the joyful innocent persona, and it's met with willful cruelty, joyful innocence collapses. Willful cruelty does not collapse as reliably with joyful innocence, but it does collapse with another persona. And this is something that I'm seeing the geometry of it in my mind as an intuition, and I'm working to figure out how to communicate it. And one of the things that came up is kind of the rock, paper, scissors dynamic. So you have the rock that can be covered by the paper, but you have the paper that can be covered by the scissor, and you have the rock that can be, and you can have the scissors that are broken by the rock. And so within that dynamic of rock, paper, and scissors, there's always one where that persona trumps the other, and there's always one where that persona is trumped by the other. So if you're rock, you can break scissors, but you're covered by paper. If you're scissors, you can be broken by a rock, but you can cut the paper. If you're paper, you can be cut by scissors, but you cover the rock. And if you just balloon that open into as many distinctions as you want, you can start with the 7 kind of colors, you can go to the 9, you can go to 12, you can go to hundreds, you can go as many colors as you want in the personas. But one persona can be triumphed and broken by whichever persona you're in, and it can be broken by at least one of the other personas. And it's often a whole group. There might be one that takes, deadly aim and kills it with a single shot. And there are some personas that are more vulnerable in different ways, because collapsing, shifting out of state, vulnerability can be measured from a variety of different metrics. So you have the phenomena where something can triumph over another, like paper can cover a rock, but can't stop the rock and the paper from being thrown, or the paper could dissolve in water, whereas the rock doesn't, and so there is a filter in human consciousness that is looking through a couple of lenses. So as you change those lenses, what is a perceived strength moves into a vulnerability. And so that's also important to understand. So because that's one of the variables. If you think of a castle, You might think of impenetrable fortress, or you might think of a prison, or you might think of something incredibly expensive and unsustainable to build and maintain. Or you might think of it as a necessary survival mechanism in order to, protect from, ship bombardment back in the day when ships would arrive and cannons and forts and things would hold a channel from being penetrated by an enemy. And so environment you have environment determines if something is a strength or a weakness. If you're running for your life in a volcano, an emergency survival kit that weighs 40 pounds on your back is probably a liability because you just need to run as fast as possible and it's heavy and it's weighing you down. If you're in a wilderness with lots of time, it could be the thing that's keeping you alive. So you have environment. Then you have the lens through which you're viewing. And then regardless in any environment and looking through any lens, you have this dynamic. As soon as the environment is set and then the lens metric is set, you now have a stable tableau of personas in which there's going, for any one persona that's responding to the environment, there's going to be other personas that it trumps, and then there's going to be other personas that destroy it. And if we think of the color wheel as kind of a gradient, then, and we understand that, while we might break it down into archetypes or 12 archetypes or the 12 knights of the round table, which, represented different things, virtue, courtesy, things like that. When we understand that, that all of this is determined by the number of distinctions. So if you break the circle down into 300 rather than 12, then you understand that for each position on the circle that might have been one of 12, you're now getting maybe 10 within that whole domain. And there might be one right in the center that is the, like the deadly shot, where one bullet just takes you out. And these other ones all could take you out as well, with a slight little increase in energy to make up for the fact that the angle is not absolutely perfect. And so what I'm interested in is mapping these out with much more articulate distinctions. So what we've got here is kind of a groping towards and for something that is it's exquisitely complex, and it's a little bit beyond our ability to just, it's not completely self-evident where you can just, draw 30 different personas and get them in the right order and understand their relationship to one another. But that's something that's exciting to explore. And if any of you, feel up to the task, I think it'd be great to watch your video. But that's what I wanted to capture as at least a placeholder for now. And then the other thing is that every system is like a body. And so a family unit functions like a body. A community functions as a body. A country functions as a body. And it's a system. And depending on how complex the system is, it will be graceful and effortless, or it will be incredibly difficult. But the more complex the system, the more complex the system, the less waste is created. And so if you look at family systems dynamics where you might have a scapegoat, that's very common. The scapegoat is the one that processes the waste, the shadow energy that nobody wants to own and nobody knows what to deal with or how to deal with it. So you have a scapegoat. That's the one that holds and embodies the taboo for the rest of the family. You might have a pleaser. That's the one that greases things and keeps things moving along. Then you have usually there's at least one critic. That's the one that scares and intimidates other people. Then there might be more of an initiator, leader, more of a, and then there's someone, following. All the different parts that need to go on to keep a family alive will tend to find roles within different family members, and that'll be the family system. And if any family is sustainable for more than a few months, it has a system that sustains it. And a schedule is a system. I do this to bring me up, then I do this to ground me, then I do this to grow, then I do this to relax, then I do this to attack myself, then I do this to repair the attack. There's a system. And so every person has a system that's comprised of, their life system, their schedule system, their family system. And within every system, there is an optimal template that is highly efficient at producing sustainable well-being. And then there are all kinds of kind of squashed, distorted versions of that create less and less well-being per unit of energy invested, energy being time, money, natural resources. And so when that system is off, you'll have bottlenecks, for example. It'd be kind of like you eat and your mouth can take in the right amount of food, your throat can swallow it, your stomach can digest it, and then there's a knot in your intestine, and so it gets stuck in so then the stomach, of course, starts to bloat. And you don't get as much nutrients in the body. And then with the bloating stomach, the muscles start distending. And then you start to get heavier weight. And then your shoulders, and so there's a whole series of ripple effects when something goes off in the family or other system. And one of the most kind of difficult problems that a system can have is taboos. Things that cannot be talked about, and it cannot be talked about that it cannot be talked about, but they're out of alignment. So there's this something that's not quite right, but it can't be talked about. And so so that's so that is part of this whole dynamic. And I'm still working on, on how to piece it together. But it sure is fun, just grappling with these things that are some of the most profound templates for all of our lives, which are, for some bizarre reason, like in our education system, we have a system that neglects more than 60% of the most essential terrain for us to function in this life. And so, part of this MAPS project is addressing that.